Hola. All right, I'm so excited. We're doing this. Okay. Next up, you've got your jar with your themes. Now, for those of you who are just joining us, we're talking about the solo show form. We've gone through the process of how you generate material. So I'm putting together a nice little class at the end of this, and it'll be a podcast essentially, taking you through step by step of how to write your solo show, how to generate material, how to create story out of that and edit it, and then how to get it produced. So the first steps that we talked about in the last video were about how to generate material with your black and white composition book. And essentially we talked about finding great writing that was inspirational to you. I talked about Things Fall Apart by Pema Children, Rilke's Letters to a Young Poet, Jhumpa Lahiri's short stories, Misinterpreter of Maladies, Unaccustomed Earth, Mary Carr, who writes a memoir that actually sounds amazingly like a solo performer standing up telling a story about their family. Read a chapter of a great piece of writing, then go to your black and white composition book with your cup of coffee and your happy music playing in the background, and write 3 pages longhand of whatever comes up. No agenda, just whatever shows up for you. They're called the morning pages. Julia Cameron writes about them in The Artist's Way. You can even pick up a copy of The Artist's Way and read a chapter of that before you start writing. Surround yourself with great writers. Read great writing all the time, right? Because we talked about in earlier videos that a solo show is a great vehicle for an artist to move their career forward. One, because people in the industry get to see you play all these thousands of different characters, which is genius, and they get an idea, oh, I could call her in for a lot of different stuff, not just people who are her age. I could call her for parts that look like they were written for men because she understands it. I saw her play that on stage, right? So it helps your career, one, helps you get an agent and a manager, two, and it creates passive income for you. Meaning, you do a solo show. I did my solo show back in 2008. It's still touring. Sometimes I tour with it. Other times I'm just doing excerpts for poetry slams and Black History Month, but I'm getting paid every single time, right? If another actor does it, that theater who did that production is paying me as the writer, and then I'm getting a percentage of the box office. So I'm making money off my solo show some days without ever getting out of bed. Solo shows are important. Stop playing. They give you your power. They also got me a big fancy manager who I had been chasing for 5 years. Finally got her to see my solo show, and she was like, I didn't know you could do all that. And I'm like, ah. But then I was like, that's on you, boo. You needed to create something that could show the industry what you do, because the industry is not making anything interesting enough to show what you can do. So these are our reasons to be generating work. Our last video, we talked about generating these morning pages, 3 a day. You write without stopping for 3 pages. You write whatever comes up. If you can't remember what to write, just go, I don't know what to write, I don't know what to write, I don't know what to write. And stay on the page. It's about staying committed to yourself and your story on the page. That's what the morning pages teach you, not to quit on yourself, because nobody's ever going to read them except you. Our last video, we talked about after 5 or 6 days of that, you've got a lot of pages. You're going to start going through and looking for recurring themes. You know, the first time somebody told you weren't good enough, there's going to be a story in there like that, right? The first Christmas present where you finally got a present that was about you and you knew your dad got you for the first time. There are going to be themes that keep coming up. You circle them, write it down on a piece of paper, put it in a jar. By the end of a month of doing morning pages, that jar is going to be full of little slips of paper with kernels, the beginnings of the stories that will be your solo show. So now you've got a jar full of themes. You're going to call up some of your friends. You're going to do a potluck. Make sure there's alcohol and chocolate, okay? Or whatever thing that you do that is your evil vice, it should be there. Whatever you associate with like letting go and getting wild. Some people, I'm not even going to talk about the substances that you may have, but you know, for the purposes of this, if it's a substance, you do what you need to do, okay? All right. For me, it was red wine and chocolate. So I got a bunch of friends together. I made a big pot of Cuban food, and we had a dark chocolate cake, and we had a lot of Ben & Jerry's and a lot of red wine. And I had taken those slips of paper. I had read them before my friends came. And I was like, I need you guys to help me write a story. I just need you to listen and maybe ask me questions. I'd take a slip of paper, look at what the subject was, and then just start talking into a recorder. But the important part of that is that because you have 5 or 6 people sitting there listening to you who've also been drinking a lot of red wine with you or whatever substance you all have, everybody's jolly and ready to hear a story. There is something about the act of telling a story to a live person that makes the story whole. I found that many times when I spoke into the recorder that way, I wrote many of the monologues that ended up in my solo show right in that recorder. The way they were transcribed is exactly how they ended up in the play. Because you're talking to people trying to get them to understand the story that you're telling. That's why this recording exercise around these themes, starting to talk about them to people who don't necessarily know the story. They don't know the background. So you're going to do just what a solo artist would do. You're going to begin to say, okay, so at my job, there's this lady and I think she's transgendered, but I'm not really sure. And then your audience goes, wow, what makes you think she's transgendered? And then you're going to describe her and maybe act her out and tell the story of these things that you discovered about this lady. This really happened to me and it was one of my monologues. It didn't end up in the show, but it'll be in another one. The fact that I had to recount that story to 5 or 6 people after I had a lot of wine and they had a lot of wine, it made it animated and fun and it made it a story. And their questions helped me be more detailed. Those recordings I then transcribed. No, don't let me lie. I had students who were like, if you pay me this amount of money for an hour, I'll transcribe it. Actor friends, I sent them tapes. People transcribed them. I gave them some money. By the end of a year of doing that, I had my friends come over once a month for a year. There was always, remember, whatever the guilty pleasures are, they should be there. Horoscope books, red wine, substances, you know. Okay, me, it's chocolate and Ben & Jerry's and red wine. It should be a joyful, festive occasion. And you're going to take those slips of paper with those themes that came from your morning pages, and you're going to start telling stories into that recorder. And then you're going to transcribe those pages. Voila. You now have the content for a solo show. Because once those pages are transcribed, because I actually would do, when I had people come once a month, it was like an all-day thing. It was a potluck, but I cooked a big pot of food, and I was like, people just come. We're going to be here at 1 o'clock, and maybe we'll be here till 11. People were at my house until 12 and 1 o'clock in the morning. You know, because people came at different times, and I never stopped telling story. Those stories that came out of those, what I call those sort of round robin events at my house, they were storytelling events. But it was really just a party where I was talking to my friends, right? That's where the best material for my solo show came from, because they were not from the world I was talking about. So I had to paint pictures of the world. And they were asking me questions which made the world more specific. Very similar to the story I told about the archivist in my last video, who asked me to describe the house where my great-grandmother lived and what my great-grandmother did. And then he went in the archives and found a picture of her house from 1911, based on the fact that I had to tell him a story about what I knew. Your voice, when you talk, is writing. Let me say that again. The way you speak and the way you communicate what happened to you or a story to another person, that's writing. That's your writer's voice, right? So if you're scared to go on the page like I was, do the recorder. But always make sure you're telling the story. When you're using that recorder, you're telling the story to somebody who doesn't know anything about the story. It forces you to generate a story that's much more specific, because you have this acting object in front of you who's demanding that you clarify the story. Tell me the details. This is funny. Give me some more. And what was she wearing? And why did she come in so late? Did she set her husband on fire? Like, it got good up in there. Okay. So at the end of a year, just once a month, one Saturday a month for a year, I had like 600 pages. I had interns and friends and students transcribing pages. I had 600 pages. That's how I created content for my show. And from those 600 pages, me and my co-writer, Jessica Blank, went through those pages, picked out the stories, and fleshed them out. Okay? I promised you I'd talk a little bit about, that's how you generate all the raw content. Now, if you got these 600 pages with all the raw content, you're going to pull the stories from there that you want. right? And those stories are going to have some connecting threads. What I found, of course, was that my story was about my parents at the end of the Black Power movement. Every really funny, outrageous story mostly was about my parents and my aunts at the end of the Black Power movement, right before the Miami riots. Those are the stories that populated, every conversation every month for a year. We could have started writing the play much sooner than a year. I mean, after 3 or 4 of those storytelling sessions, if you're sitting there telling a story for 2 or 3 hours and you do have 4 or 5 of those sessions, when somebody transcribes that, that's 200 pages of writing. It's really, this is so easy. Like, the secret to writing a solo show, it really is a secret. People are like, I don't know where to begin. Maybe I should do stand-up. No, I'm telling you, this is easy. Anybody can do it. You can do it. Especially if you got a recorder and you're cray-cray like me. Oh, okay. And you have cray-cray friends who are going to force you to tell a story. Okay, we're golden. You got your 600 pages. You're going to pull some stories from that and find the connections. And then hopefully you're going to have a brilliant co-writer, or you're going to get a writing coach, or you're going to take those kernels of stories and approach a writer and pay them to write your solo show. Whichever path you want. But it needs to be somebody who knows how to put those pieces together and create narrative. Again, because if the writing is no good, your solo show is not going to make you money in the future, because theaters only pick solo shows with great writing. Which is why lots of solo shows get a bad name. People are like, oh, it's just people complaining about their family. Oh, it's just therapy. No, a solo show is a great play. It's a great piece of writing. So you're either going to learn how to do that kind of writing, or you're going to hire somebody, or you're going to team up with a writer who's already been successful and say, okay, we'll split the royalties. However you do that, make sure you have somebody's eyes on that, even if you have to pay them. And I suggest you do pay them. Getting notes from people you're not paying means that the notes are quick and on the run, because the person who gave you the notes doesn't necessarily have the investment. The notes need to come from somebody who's done what you want to do successfully, an established writer, right? That will get the play moving in the right direction and make it sexier to theaters. All right, so you've either paid somebody or partnered with somebody. You got a script based on the transcripts that came out of these recordings. Now you're going to start applying to every place that you've ever worked as an actor, a playwright, a dramaturg, any place in the industry. It could even be a community theater in your hometown because you know somebody and they love you. It could be a drama program. You're going to begin to think about organizations and institutions where you already have a foothold in there, and you're going to start sending out your play, right? And trying to get readings and feedback. Yes. You're going to do some research on theaters that you've worked at or are about to work at. You're going to go to their websites and you're going to see what their submission policy is. Because lots of places have, even if you don't have an agent, they have a submission policy. You could send us 10 pages, right? You're not going to send a theater 10 pages until you've had a professional writer give you notes on that script, though, or until you've been in a really well-established lab, right? That's another way to get produced. If you get into Sundance, Eugene O'Neill Playwrights, the Lark Theater, the Public Emerging Playwrights, the Playwright Fellows at New York Theater Workshop, if you get in a developmental lab that has a tremendous reputation like that, the folks that took your application and said, yes, please come to Sundance, they're now invested in getting that play produced. That's why they brought you there to develop the work. So you're going to apply to these developmental labs, and then you're going to find out every theater that you know, and it's even better if you're working on a project right now and you're doing great work at that theater, you make sure during the run of that play that you go to the literary person and say, I have a play of my own. Could I possibly do a reading for you guys? You begin to work the connections you already have. And it's very useful if you're at a theater already doing fantastic work. They're going to be happy to hear your play. Half of the readings I've ever done of my play. Sometimes, in most places, because equity says you have to get paid, for a reading, were at theaters that I was actually working at the time, which is why they gave me the reading. It made a buzz happen in the artistic community, right? It got lots of people who already knew about the work, who were cheering me on from the sidelines, who were chatting about it to other literary people at theaters, at play readings, at organizations, at theater companies where I was doing readings. I did readings of my play from every place like New York Stage and Film to the Culture Project to Seattle ACT while I was performing a play there. I said, let me do my play for you everywhere. And it was useful. It helped me flesh it out, but it also helped me get people in the industry who were cheering me on and giving me opportunities. And it got them talking about my work long before I showed it to a theater to produce. So you're going to look at the resources that are already within your career. And that's where you're going to submit the play first. So you have a two-pronged attack. The places where you've already worked, and that means readings, paid jobs, unpaid jobs. Even better if you've done readings for a place for free. Oh, well, you should ask them to do a reading of your play because you've been working for them for free. Never devalue your work as an artist, right? So you're applying to the places you already have a foothold. Then you're applying to prestigious developmental labs, workshops, residencies. And if you're watching this video, you're probably on my list for the Writer's Arsenal. If you're not, you need to make a comment down on the blog and say, how do I get on your list? Because the Writer's Arsenal, I send out a whole stack, a whole week's worth of developmental labs, residencies, fellowships, all these places where writers can apply to get paid to write, right? So I'm happy to pass those resources on to you. So that's the two-pronged attack. You're much more likely when your play is done to get it produced by people who you've already worked with than you are with people who don't know you. That's, I ended up getting a big fancy agent, through my co-writer for my first solo show. And where I ended up doing most of the readings and where my play was finally produced? The theater that I've worked the most at in New York City. Like, there were actually 2 theaters that I have tons of good New York Times reviews from. I've done tons of readings and plays for them. Those 2 theaters made me offers on my play before anybody else because I had a relationship there. That's just, Classic Theater of Harlem and New York Theater Workshop. I love them. I love the work they do. They've called me for something to do it. I say, oh, you want me to do a reading? I'll do it for free. You want to play a part in this play? I'll do it. For how much you paying me? $10 a week? That's okay. I love to play. I love the theater. Right? I've been a part of that community. When I got a solo play done, written, those were the places that made me the offer first. That only makes sense. So getting produced is not rocket science, right? This whole gig is about relationships, right? So that's how you get produced. If you got questions, ask me down in the comment section. The next video, I'm going to come back and talk to you about the questions that I'm getting in the comments, and then I'm going to create a podcast. And it'll probably be in sections, 2 or 3 sections, where I go through all of these steps one by one. I promise you it will be inexpensive, just because I've had such an overwhelming amount of email asking me about solo work that I know that there's a great need, right? I don't have the time to run out and do no classes and schedule a studio and all that, but I can certainly do podcasts and sell it to you for cheap, right? You're not paying for the overhead of me renting the studio and listening to me talk for 3 days. You could do that with a podcast. It's cheaper. So the next video, I'm going to come back and I'm going to answer any questions that you have from these videos that have come before. Any comments, whatever. I'm going to address them in that video. And it'll probably be about, the generating material and narrating. I'll give you some more tips. I want you to get this done. I want at the end of the year, half of my client base to write me and say, my play is done. You don't know how happy that makes me, right? Juan Villa, David Newer, Heather Raffo, Nil Serena. A lot of my clients have finished their shows, Michelle Hartley, and produced them. This is genius. This is what we should be doing, and we should be doing it for each other, right? So I'm making these videos because I want to get a note from you, or I want you to stop me at the opening night of a play and be like, hey bro, I bought that video. and I wrote my play and I got to produce. You want a ticket? That's what I want to hear. Get it done. Get it done. You can do this. That's why I'm laying it out for you. It ain't rocket science. You got this. Let's make this happen.